In this screencast, I want to look at some um, modifier keys as well as keyboard shortcuts that I use frequently in Adobe Illustrator. So why would you use keyboard shortcuts or even modifier keys for that matter? Keyboard shortcuts are faster ways to activate or invoke various tools and features within Illustrator, InDesign, or any of the Adobe apps. The modifier keys are keys like the Shift key, the Option key, the Command key that can be used in conjunction with other tools. And they cause those tools to behave differently. Sometimes that's what we want. So I'm going to begin with modifier keys. And you'll notice that I'm using Show key, so at the bottom of my screen, you'll see anytime I touch a key on my keyboard, you'll see that command or that key pop up. So I'm going to start with the Shift key because that's probably one that I use the most. The Shift key, depending upon which tools you're using, might do different things. But its primary purpose, or the primary thing I use it for, is to make sure that I constrain objects proportionally, and to make sure that I constrain objects on either an X, a Y, or a 45-degree axis anytime I'm moving them. So here's what I mean by that. I'm going to start off with just a rectangle or a square. I'll make a rectangle to start with. And I can click, when I have my selection tool, I can click on it and drag it around anywhere I want. But if I press the Shift key and then click on it and drag, it's going to constrain it to either the horizontal, the vertical, or 45-degree axis. Kind of jumps around there a little bit if I'm moving my cursor around too much, but by and large, it just constrains it on one axis or another. The other thing that key does is if I go to resize an image, I'll just click, an object, an image, whatever. I'll just click on a corner and I can resize it. But based upon where, I pull my cursor to, I kind of freeform my resizing. So I can make a rectangle, horizontal rectangle, into a vertical rectangle pretty easily. But what if I have this shape and I need to make it smaller, but I don't want it to change in proportion at all? That's where the Shift key modifier comes in again. If I click on that corner, hold down my Shift key, and drag, that'll constrain it to that proportion. This works for shapes, any other object, a spline, images that you place in Illustrator, type, any object. The Shift key will constrain its proportions, and when you go to move it around. One thing that can be a little bit frustrating is that you really got to kind of click and hit the keys in the right order. So if I want to select this object, I guess I could hold down my Shift key and click on it and then drag it. But if I already have an object selected, all I want to do is click on it again and then touch the Shift key and move it around. So if it's already selected, you hit the Shift key first and you click on it, you're going to deselect it. The next modifier key is going to be the Option modifier key. So with the same object, if I want to resize it, I'll just touch the Option key, and I can resize it from the center of that object. See how no matter whether I go landscape or portrait with the orientation of that shape, it's scaling or resizing off of the center point. And again, this goes for all elements in Illustrator. What if I want to scale it, but make sure that its center point doesn't move? I'll just click on that corner, hit the Option key and the Shift key, and then I'll scale it on the center. The Option key and the Shift key work the same way, even if I'm drawing out a shape, and I'm just going to use a rectangle here again. But if I hold down the Shift key and then click and drag, it's going to make sure that I draw a perfectly square shape. If I'm using a circle or the ellipse tool and do the same thing, it'll make sure that it's a perfectly shaped circle. If I hold down the Option key and draw a shape out, it'll draw it out. The center will be where I initially click. In the first example, when I clicked, it drew it out from the top left corner. But with the Option key, it'll draw it out from, it'll use the point that I click as the center point and draw the object out from there. So what if I want to draw, I know my center point's going to be right here. I can use my Option key and my Shift key both, click, and draw out a perfect square that way as well. So that's using the Shift key and the Option key with an object, an image, type, you name it, to modify the way those are drawn on screen. Another function that the Option key has, so I was just scaling and moving objects around, or scaling objects more accurately, I guess, around in my previous examples. But what if I want to duplicate an object? If I click on my object, hold down the Option key and drag, I can duplicate, I can make a copy of that object. Drag it around as many places as I want. If I want to duplicate it, but put it directly below the original, I can click on it with my Option key, press my Option key, then press my Shift key and drag. That will constrain it to the Y-axis or the X-axis, depending on which direction I drag it, and create my duplicate directly below the original. So if I need multiples of these running down through here, all spaced the same, I don't have to do that whole process again. I can use the first of my keyboard shortcuts to make that happen. The duplicate command, where you hit the Command key and the D key, and it will duplicate the last action that you made. And with that object still selected, if I do it a second time, it'll make another copy. And I do it again, and it'll make a third, and on. Whenever you're using a duplicate key, though, don't deselect the object. It will continue duplicating it until you do so. Now, if I click off of it and hit the duplicate key, nothing happens because I no longer have the object selected to perform that action on. If I go ahead and select that object again, and I do Command D, I can pick it up from where I started. So that's Command D, that duplicates the last action that you made. So one last key is a modifier. I'm going to type a letter here, use my Shift key, and I'm just going to scale that up. So I might want to keep, I've got my type tool selected, and I might want to keep typing in the same spot, but do it with different point characters. If I hit the Command key, that'll invoke the selection tool. I can click and drag to move an object, but then when I let go of it, I have my type tool back again, which was my original tool. So I can do that again, R. I'll just scale that up. Select my type tool. We'll move that out of the way. See if I hit my Option key, or I hit my Command key, I can click on that corner, but I can also combine that with my Shift key and scale that object up. With my Command key still pressed down, I can move that out of the way. And when I let go of it, I'm back to my Type tool. It takes a little bit of playing around with, but it's an extremely important time saver. So that was the Command key. Select all of those, delete those. Those are the primary modifier keys. So a couple of keyboard shortcuts that I use often. I'm going to go ahead and draw a square here. And it's, you know, just your standard black square. No stroke on it or anything else. But if I get sort of a lot of objects on my screen overlapping, I see kind of one shape, but because they're all the same color, I can't really tell very intuitively where one ends and the other begins. I can obviously hover over top of it, but by default, our viewport is working in preview mode. And if we take a look at our tab, the very last option next to the color space, it says preview. We're working in preview mode. If I tap Command Y on my keyboard, that switches me to outline mode. And when I'm in outline mode, all that I'm looking at are the actual paths that I have on my artboard or in my workspace. I'm not seeing the fills or the strokes, which are all appearance items. Outline mode removes the appearance items so that you can focus strictly on the paths of those objects and see what you have on your page. If I select one of those and go to my direct select tool, I can see the 4 points that make up my square, as well as the 4 paths that connect them all. And if I click on just one of those, you see it's blue, where the rest of them are all white. I've selected specifically that point. I'll just hold down my Shift key. I'm going to drag it 45 degrees towards the other corner. I can reshape objects a little more convenient that way. If I hit Command Y again on my keyboard, I'll see what that looks like in my preview mode. And I can move those around. So Command Y is a fairly useful tool. Command plus and Command minus, zoom in and zoom out. But a little bit more importantly, if I've got an object selected and I decide to zoom in, Command plus, it will snap that object to the center of my work, to my center of my viewport, and focus on it as I scale in and out. So if I'm working on a complex object and there's a certain area that I need to be able to see a little better, select an object in that area, Command plus, Command minus will zoom in and out on those. So now, after zooming around my viewport here, I've kind of got everything off center. If I tap Command 0 on my keyboard, that will fit my object into the viewport and center it on the screen. If I hit Command 1, that will resize my pasteboard or my artboard to 100% of size. Based upon the size of my viewport right now, my artboard is a little over 160%. So that's Command 0 and Command 1. Some other common key commands. Are obviously ones that probably everybody knows from most every app out there. If you select an object, Command C copies it. Command V will paste it, so you can paste additional copies. But the object selected, if I copy it and I do Command B, that will paste a copy directly behind the object that I have selected. So if I click on this and I drag it off, you'll see that there's another copy directly behind it. With that object selected, if I copy it again and I do Command F, that pastes another copy directly in front. And maybe it's actually a little easier to see what's actually happening there if I open up my layer panel and I open it. So here's my rectangle that I have selected. I can copy and then I can paste behind, and you see I can see the second rectangle that was created in my workspace. It's just directly behind the first one. Then if I do Command F, you'll see the new one that I placed in front. If you have two documents open and they're the same size, say you just want to transfer artwork from one document to another, a useful shortcut might be, and I'm going to use Command X this time to cut this object. But if I press Command Shift V, that'll paste it exactly back in the same position it was when I started, where the original object was. So if I need to create another, actually let's move this off here to make it a little more obvious. So I'm going to copy this. I want to make a new document, 7 inches by 7 inches. Create. Now if I hold down my Command key and my Shift key and hit V, you see it placed that box in exactly the same position it was in the original document. I also find it handy for pasting between layers as well, although paste in front, paste in back kind of do the same thing, but I tend to use paste in the same location between layers. So then let's do one more thing. There's one more. If I tap so I've got my artboard here. I'm going to jump back real quick to a modifier key. No matter what object, which tool I have selected, if I tap the space bar, see my cursor change to a hand, I can pan my artboard around my workspace that way. If I'm zoomed in, I can kind of pan around by hitting the space bar. So like I said, there's a whole boatload of other key commands. I mean, even even when you look at the shape tools, tap M for rectangle, L for ellipse, will invoke those tools. Tap L. Key commands are also labeled within your workspace next to the tool, or if you take a look in your menus, you'll frequently see these little notations out here, Command G for group, Shift Command G for ungroup. So pay attention to those, get used to using those. It'll speed up your workflow a lot.